It was a crisp morning, the kind where the chill of the night still lingered in the air. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a soft, golden light over the town's quiet cemetery. The grounds were peaceful, almost serene, with only the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze disturbing the silence. It had been 2 years since David lost his daughter Sarah. A tragic accident had taken her life, and since then, every visit to her grave felt like reopening an old wound. Today, however, was different. David stood at the edge of the cemetery, his eyes immediately drawn to the spot where Sarah's grave rested. As he walked closer, he noticed something unusual. The grave that had always been marked by the cold stone, with the earth still fresh from the last burial, was now completely covered in lush, vibrant grass. But what struck him the most was how thick and green the grass was. It wasn't the usual patchy growth he'd seen at other graves. This was something else. Confused, David knelt down, running his fingers over the grass. It felt different, as if it were freshly planted. But the thought of someone tending to his daughter's grave, without his knowledge, seemed strange. He looked around. The cemetery was as quiet as ever, and no one else appeared to be nearby. As his fingers brushed over the earth, David's mind raced. Had someone taken it upon themselves to care for her resting place? But who? And why now? 2 years after her death. He had always made sure her grave was maintained, clean, untouched by weeds. But this was beyond ordinary care. It was as though the grave had been transformed overnight. David stood up, his heart racing. Something felt off. The cemetery had always been a place of mourning for him, but today there was something else in the air, something unsettling. His eyes searched the surrounding graves, but no one else seemed to be around. He was alone with his thoughts, and with this strange new sight before him. Then a sudden realization hit him. There was something beneath the grass, something that made his heart skip a beat. He carefully pushed the grass aside with trembling hands, and what he uncovered sent a chill down his spine. David's hands trembled as he pushed the thick green grass aside, revealing what lay beneath. At first it seemed like just more earth and roots, but then his fingers brushed against something hard, something that didn't belong. His heart skipped a beat as he cleared away more of the grass, revealing a wooden box, slightly weathered and buried just beneath the surface. His breath caught in his throat. What was this? A box, completely out of place in his daughter's grave. It hadn't been there before, that much was certain. David had visited Sarah's resting place countless times over the past 2 years, and there had been no sign of anything like this. For a moment, David simply stared at the box, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. His mind raced. Had someone come in the middle of the night and left it there? Or was this something his daughter had left behind, something he hadn't known about? A strange, unsettling thought crossed his mind. Could this be related to the accident? The box was small, just large enough to hold a few personal items. The wood had darkened with age, but it was still sturdy. David's hands shook as he gently reached for it, lifting it from the grave. He felt a sense of unease wash over him, as if the box held some kind of secret, something that had been hidden for far too long. He opened it slowly, the creak of the lid almost too loud in the stillness of the cemetery. Inside, he found a small, folded piece of paper and a locket. The paper, yellowed with age, seemed to have been written on, but the handwriting was unfamiliar to him. David carefully unfolded the paper, his eyes scanning the few words written on it. His throat tightened as he read the message. I will always be with you, even in the darkest places. Don't stop looking for the truth. His heart raced, and he felt the world around him blur for a moment. The words seemed to pierce through him, as though they had been meant for him, like a message from Sarah herself. But what did it mean? What truth was she referring to? And why had she left this behind, buried beneath her grave? He quickly looked at the locket, his hands trembling as he held it up. The locket was delicate, almost too delicate to have been buried with her. It was engraved with a symbol he didn't recognize. It was faint, but he could make out the shape of a small, intertwined knot, a design that didn't match anything he knew about his daughter's life. David's mind raced. What had Sarah known? What was the truth she had left behind? And why had it been hidden here, beneath her grave? There was only one thing he was sure of now. The answers to his questions weren't going to be easy to find, but he had to know. He couldn't rest until he understood what had really happened, what had really taken his daughter away from him. David stood there for a long moment, holding the locket in his hand, his fingers still trembling. The paper with its cryptic message felt heavier with each passing second. Every part of him wanted to believe that this was some kind of mistake, an unexplainable oddity that would be easily forgotten. But deep down, David knew better. This wasn't a coincidence. There was something far deeper going on, something tied to Sarah's death that he had never been told. His mind raced as he tucked the paper and the locket into his jacket pocket, the weight of both things dragging on him. He glanced around the cemetery once more, as if expecting someone to appear out of nowhere and explain all of this. But there was only the wind, in the distant hum of life beyond the gates. He felt as if he were the only one who could see the truth of this moment. With shaky legs, David walked back to his car, the path ahead feeling like a journey into the unknown. He couldn't just go home and pretend that this moment had never happened. He had to understand why Sarah had left this behind. Why, after 2 years, this mysterious box had been buried with her. What had she been trying to tell him? The unease in his stomach grew as he drove toward the local library. He needed answers, and he knew there was only one place where he might find them. The library held records, old newspapers, and other documents that could help him understand what was really going on. David was determined to dig deeper into Sarah's past. There had to be something that connected her to this strange message. The library, as quiet as ever, greeted him with its familiar, dusty smell. He had been there many times before, most often for research for his work. But today was different. Today he was looking for something more than just books. He was searching for a clue, a hint, something that could explain why his daughter had left him that note and locket. The librarian, an older woman with thick glasses, greeted him with a nod as he entered. She didn't ask any questions, but David could tell she noticed his tense, hurried demeanor. He barely acknowledged her before heading straight for the back section of the library. It was where the old records were kept, far from the rest of the patrons. He knew exactly where to go. David scanned the shelves for the old newspapers, his hands quickly pulling out stacks of yellowed paper. He rifled through them, searching for anything that might mention his daughter, her accident, or anything that could explain the mystery of the box and the message. Hours passed as he flipped through page after page, but nothing seemed to stand out. He was about to give up when a headline caught his eye. Local girl's tragic accident. Authorities still searching for answers. David's heart skipped a beat as he pulled the newspaper from the shelf. He read the article, his eyes scanning the words frantically. The piece described Sarah's accident in detail, the car crash that had taken her life. It was a typical report, filled with the usual condolences and statements from the authorities. But then, as he reached the bottom of the article, his breath caught in his throat. There was something else, something that hadn't made sense at the time, something that David had never heard about. The report mentioned that authorities had been unable to locate Sarah's phone after the accident. It was a small detail, one that had seemed insignificant then, but now with the box, the locket, and the message in his hands, it felt like the missing piece to the puzzle. David read the sentence again. Searchers were unable to recover the missing phone from the scene of the crash. Authorities suspect it may have been tampered with before the crash, but further investigation was required. He slammed the paper down on the table, his thoughts racing. Sarah's phone had been missing? How had he not known about this before? He remembered the phone now, how it had never been found, how it had always seemed like a small mystery, nothing more than a minor detail in the aftermath of a tragedy. But now it felt like something more. David stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His mind was spinning, filled with questions. If Sarah's phone had been tampered with before the crash, then someone had been involved. Someone had been there, altering the events of that night, and he had no idea who. The locket, the message, and now this. There was a thread connecting it all. But the truth was slipping further from his grasp the more he uncovered. David turned to the librarian, who had been watching him from the desk. I need to know who wrote this article, he said, his voice determined. Do you have any information on that? The librarian looked at him with a mix of curiosity and caution, but nodded. I can check the archives for you. Give me a moment. As she disappeared into the back, David couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been hiding something from him all this time. The phone, the missing pieces, the cryptic message from Sarah, everything pointed to something much bigger than just an accident. He wasn't sure who or what was behind it all, but David was more certain than ever that the answers were out there, and he wasn't going to stop until he found them. David stood by the library's large windows, his thoughts racing as he watched the librarian disappear into the back. The weight of everything he had uncovered today, the locket, the message, the missing phone, was beginning to crush him. There were too many pieces to this puzzle, too many unanswered questions, and the deeper he dug, the more it felt like he was being pulled into a dark web of secrets. As he waited, he replayed the details in his mind. Sarah's accident had been tragic, but it was all too neat, too simple. He had accepted it at the time. The reports, the police statements, the way the world moved on. But now the missing phone and the strange message had created an entirely new reality. A reality he wasn't ready to accept, but couldn't ignore. The librarian returned carrying a thick file in her hands. She looked at him with a mix of sympathy and curiosity. Here you go, she said quietly, placing the file in front of him. This article was written by a reporter named Linda Green. She worked for the local news station at the time. I didn't find much more than that, but you might want to contact the station. David nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. Linda Green. The name didn't ring a bell, but it felt important. He felt an overwhelming sense of urgency. Whatever Linda Green knew, she had the key to understanding what had really happened to Sarah. David took the file and left the library, his mind set on finding out more. As he stepped into the cool evening air, the weight of the mystery settled back onto his shoulders. He had to find Linda Green, and he had to know everything she knew about the accident. But there was something else nagging at him, something that made him uneasy. Sarah's message. Don't stop looking for the truth. Had she known something was going to happen to her? Had she left him these clues to protect herself, to make sure he wouldn't just accept the easy answers? The drive to the local news station was filled with a quiet determination. David knew time was running out. He had to piece everything together before whatever this was consumed him completely. When he arrived at the station, it was already evening. The lights inside were dim, but the front door was still open. He walked in, and the receptionist looked up, greeting him with a polite smile. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice soft. "I'm looking for Linda Green," David replied. "She wrote an article about a local accident a couple of years ago. Do you know if she's still working here?" The receptionist glanced at a computer screen and nodded. "Yes, she's still with us, but she's not in the newsroom at the moment. I can call her for you." David nodded. "Please tell her it's urgent. I need to speak with her." A few minutes later, the receptionist returned with a phone number written down on a piece of paper. "Linda's on her way. She'll be here shortly," she said, with a slightly concerned look. David took the paper and sat down, tapping his fingers nervously on the armrest. He wasn't sure what to expect from Linda Green, but one thing was clear. She knew something, and he had to find out what. It felt like an eternity before the door to the newsroom opened and a woman in her early 40s stepped inside. Her dark hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, and she carried an air of confidence that was immediately apparent. She didn't seem surprised to see David waiting for her, though she did glance around the room to confirm it was him. "You must be David," she said, walking toward him with a firm handshake. "Linda Green, what's this about?" David didn't waste time. "I need to know everything about Sarah's accident, the article you wrote. There's something that doesn't add up, and I need you to explain it." Linda raised an eyebrow but motioned for him to follow her into a small conference room. "All right, let's talk." Once seated, David took a deep breath and explained everything. About the box he had found on Sarah's grave, the message she had left behind, and the missing phone that had never been mentioned in the reports. As he spoke, he noticed the shift in Linda's expression. She went from professional to cautious, her eyes narrowing slightly as he mentioned the phone. "You're not the first person to come looking for answers," Linda said quietly, her voice lowering. "There were a lot of odd things surrounding that accident. I had my suspicions at the time, but I couldn't get enough information to make it public. David leaned forward, desperate for clarity. What do you mean? What happened to Sarah? Linda hesitated, glancing around as if making sure no one else was listening. Then she leaned in closer. I'll tell you this. There's more to Sarah's accident than you were told. It wasn't just a simple crash. I dug into the records after the report, and there were discrepancies. Things the police didn't mention in their official statement. David's heart raced again. Discrepancies? What kind of discrepancies? Linda sighed, rubbing her temple. The phone was just the tip of the iceberg. I don't know how much you know, but the crash wasn't as accidental as they made it seem. There were certain people involved who were connected to your daughter in ways you couldn't have imagined. David felt the blood drain from his face. What do you mean? Someone tampered with the accident. It wasn't just Sarah driving alone that night, Linda continued, her voice filled with urgency. And I have reason to believe that whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. David stood up suddenly, his mind reeling. Who? Who was involved? Who did this to her? Linda's eyes grew sad, almost apologetic. I don't know, but I think it's time you find out. You deserve the truth. David stood there, his hands clenched into fists. His head was spinning, but he knew one thing for sure. His daughter's death had been no accident. Someone had orchestrated it, and now with Linda's help, he was going to uncover the people responsible, no matter what it took. David's mind raced as he stood there, trying to process everything Linda had just told him. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The very idea that Sarah's death wasn't an accident, that someone had orchestrated it, someone had been behind the wheel, pulling the strings, made his blood run cold. His heart pounded in his chest, and the more he thought about it, the more everything began to make sense. The missing phone, the strange message, the box beneath Sarah's grave, it was all connected. I need to find out who did this, David said, his voice steady but filled with determination. He wasn't going to let the truth stay buried. His daughter deserved that much at the very least. Linda looked at him, her expression a mixture of concern and regret. I understand, David, but be careful. Some things are better left buried. The people involved in this, whoever they are, won't let you get the answers you're looking for so easily. David felt a rush of frustration. I don't care. I'm not walking away from this. I need to know what happened to Sarah. I need to know the truth. Linda hesitated for a moment before speaking again. There's someone you need to speak to, someone who might know more than anyone else. His name is Marcus Reed. He was the last person to see Sarah before the accident. The name struck David like a thunderbolt. Marcus Reed. He had never heard that name before. Who was he? Why hadn't he been mentioned in the official reports? His mind raced with 1,000 questions. Where can I find him? He asked, his voice tight with urgency. Linda took a deep breath. I don't know where he is now, but I can give you a lead. I remember him from some of the public records I pulled. He worked as an intern at the hospital, and he was there the night of the crash. But there's something off about him. He left town right after the accident. David didn't need to hear more. He thanked Linda and left the news station in a daze. Every instinct told him Marcus Reed was the key to unraveling the mystery. He had to find him, no matter what it took. The next few days were a blur of searching, phone calls, and dead ends. But just as David was about to give up, he received a tip from a source that led him to a small, nondescript house on the outskirts of town. The address was for a rundown street that he had never heard of before, but something about it felt right. This was where Marcus Reed had been living. David parked his car down the road and approached the house cautiously. The front yard was overgrown with weeds and the windows were dark, giving the place an eerie, abandoned feel. But something told him Marcus was here. He had to be. He knocked on the door, his knuckles almost trembling as he waited for a response. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the door creaked open and a man stood before him. David's heart skipped a beat. It was Marcus Reed. What do you want? Marcus asked, his voice low, almost offensive. He looked different than David had imagined. His face was gaunt, his eyes dark and haunted. It was as if the man had been carrying a burden for far too long. I need to talk to you, David said, his voice steady. About Sarah. I know you were the last one with her before the crash. I need to know what happened. Marcus's expression shifted, his face tightening. He looked around nervously before stepping aside to let David in. The room was small and cluttered, and there was an air of secrecy about the place. It was clear Marcus hadn't expected anyone to show up, especially not David. "Why are you asking about Sarah?" Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper. David stepped forward, locking eyes with him. "Because I know something wasn't right. The accident wasn't an accident. I know you're hiding something, and I need to know what it is." Marcus flinched at the mention of the accident. "You don't understand," he said, his voice breaking. "It was never supposed to happen like this. I didn't want this to happen, but I was part of it. Before Marcus could finish, David interrupted. "You were part of what? What happened to Sarah? What really happened that night?" Marcus lowered his head, his shoulders slumping as though the weight of the truth was finally too much for him to carry. "We were working on something dangerous. It wasn't supposed to go this far. But Sarah, she got involved. She didn't know what she was walking into." David's heart pounded in his chest. "What are you talking about? What did you do to her?" Marcus took a deep breath. "Sarah didn't die by accident. She was part of an experiment, something we were testing. It was supposed to be a medical trial, a way to bring people back. But something went wrong. I didn't want her to be involved, but she found out too much. And when she did, they decided to silence her. They made it look like an accident, but they didn't count on her coming back." David stood there, stunned. The words were a blur in his mind. An experiment? Someone had tried to bring Sarah back? He couldn't wrap his head around it. But as the pieces began to fall into place, the truth was more terrifying than he could have ever imagined. "The phone," David said, his voice barely a whisper. "The message. It was you, wasn't it? You're the one who left that box at her grave. You're the one who wanted me to find the truth." Marcus looked up at him, his eyes filled with regret. "I couldn't stop it, but I wanted you to know. I never wanted her to die. She didn't deserve any of this." David's mind raced as he processed everything Marcus had just said. The experiment, the people who had been involved. Sarah's death had never been an accident. It had all been planned. And now David had the truth. But it wasn't over. Whoever was behind this wouldn't stop. And David knew that the fight for justice wasn't going to be easy. But now with the truth in hand, he had the power to bring them down. David turned and walked out of the house, his heart heavy but determined. He would do whatever it took to expose the people who had hurt his daughter, and he would make sure they paid for what they had done.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.